One of the biggest things that you can actually do to greatly impact your emissions footprint is think about your fuel efficiency. So, if you've ever heard of the term miles per gallon, that's what we're talking about here. The idea behind fuel efficiency is simply how much gasoline does it take you to travel a certain distance? And here in the United States, yeah, we usually use miles per gallon. Um, and so think about what your gas mileage is in your vehicle. If you drive, what your gas mileage is. Um, Average is usually somewhere between 20 to 25 miles per gallon. If you're driving in a hybrid vehicle, you may be somewhere closer to 35 to 45, maybe even a little bit higher if you're in like a really nice, newer, fine-tuned hybrid vehicle. But yeah, so really the fuel efficiency, how many miles you get per gallon, that also relates to how many miles you get per emissions. And so if you have a more fuel efficient vehicle, you're going to ultimately have a smaller carbon footprint because you're going a longer distance for the same amount of gasoline and for the same amount of emissions. That means you're now traveling further when you're traveling further with that same amount of emissions. Ultimately, that results in less emissions. That ultimately results in a decrease in your emissions. So this actually shows fuel efficiency all across the world. And the red line down there is the United States. And then you have France, Japan, Germany, the United Kingdom, Australia, and then the United States. And if you notice, really France, Germany, and the United Kingdom over in Europe have much higher fuel efficiencies than, say, the United States, which kind of teeters a little bit closer to roughly 20, 21, 22 miles to the gallon. So, so yeah, the fact of the matter is here in the United States, not only are we much more car centric, but the vehicles that we actually drive actually have much poorer fuel efficiency than much of the rest of the developed world. I don't want to speak for the developing world. I want to speak for the developed world. It really does vary by region of the globe. And the reason why is there's several factors that greatly affect fuel efficiency. The first thing is actually driving conditions. If you are driving in a city versus driving in the countryside, that greatly affects the efficiency of your vehicle. I notice it even driving in my hybrid. My fuel efficiency is actually worse in the city than it is on the highway. I notice that whenever I'm driving just a short distance, I may only get 25, 30 miles to the gallon, whereas when I'm driving on the freeway, it's usually closer to 45 to 50 miles to the gallon. And then it usually all averages out at just about 40 miles to the gallon for me. Again, that's because I have a hybrid. But that greatly dictates your fuel efficiency. Also, speed greatly dictates your fuel efficiency. And I'll actually talk about that in the next few slides. Taxes on petroleum and vehicles. So believe it or not, the efficiency of your fuel actually depends on, or actually determines how much you pay for it. So if you are driving a less efficient vehicle, those tend to be taxed a little bit more. Whereas if you're driving a more efficient vehicle, usually not only do you not have to pay nearly as much in taxes, but you may also get tax incentives. And so that greatly influences what kind of vehicles are being produced. Consumer preferences. This is a big one here in the United States. Here in the United States, we love those big old Texas trucks, huge, big, bulky, very poor mileage trucks. On the other hand, other places, especially places that are more densely populated, prefer smaller vehicles. And smaller vehicles, typically that means there's less weight, Less weight typically means you don't need as powerful an engine, which usually means that you get more fuel efficiency from it. You're able to drive further on that same gallon. Um, the use of diesel powered vehicles also greatly affects fuel efficiency. And then automobile manufacturer agreements. So many countries around the world actually have agreements with automobile manufacturers. Hey, you can sell your vehicle in our state or in our city or in our country if it's at least this efficient. Here in California, we are actually really working on requiring automobile manufacturers to actually create vehicles that are minimum 35 miles to the gallon. Minimum 35 miles to the gallon. And so that affects fuel efficiency. Speed greatly affects fuel efficiency. And the reason why is because initially, when you're going really slow or you're idling, there's a lot of energy that's being fed into your engine, but it's actually not causing you to go any faster. And so usually driving or coasting at really low speeds ends up actually eating up a lot of gasoline. On the other hand, if you go too fast, the faster you go, the more drag is being applied to your vehicle. The more drag being applied to your vehicle, the slower you're going to go. In this case, fuel efficiency then begins to decrease again. So initially, when you're driving really, really slow, fuel efficiency is low. Then as you speed up, it goes up. And then it kind of peaks at just around 50 miles per hour. After that, resistance due to wind and drag actually causes fuel efficiency to drop back down. Vehicles traveling at 75 miles per hour are 20% less fuel efficient than those traveling at 55 miles per hour. And this right here, this is actually a survey of a bunch of different vehicles. And this was done in kilometers per hour. So a kilometer is 0.6 miles. So take these numbers, and if you wanted to convert them to miles per hour, actually multiply them by 1.6. Or sorry, whoops, actually, sorry. Divide, multiply them by 0.6. I apologize. I had a brain fart there real quick. And what you'll actually notice is right around that 70 to 80 kilometers an hour, that's right around 50 miles an hour, fuel efficiency peaks. And then after that, it rapidly begins to decline. It rapidly begins to decline. On the other hand, when you're driving really, really slow, 10, 15 miles per hour, you'll notice that your fuel efficiency is usually pretty low. And then once you get to a good optimum speed, it sort of peaks, and then increased wind resistance causes it to decline again. Now, that being said, here in the United States, we are speed demons. Don't believe me? Try actually driving the speed limit here in California on a freeway and see how you're treated. See how people relate to you. Well, in the 1970s, we had a pretty big oil crisis between us and the Middle East. During that time, we had to greatly ration our oil. And as a result, one of the very clever ways that the government tried to impose rationing was to actually decrease speed limits. And the idea was that if you're going a little bit slower, you're not producing as much wind resistance, and that then causes you to better use your gas. And so the idea was nationwide, the peak speed would be 55 miles per hour. And the idea was that peak efficiency speed. If you're going faster than that, you're using up more oil, and that can be an issue. Well, that obviously didn't last. As we got past that oil crisis, speed limits have regularly gone up. And Here in California, the sign usually says 65. If you're out in the middle of nowhere, it may say 70. But in other states, you can see speed limits of 70, 75, 80, even 85 in some parts of Texas. This is Texas Highway 130, State Highway 130 in Texas. And on this particular stretch, the speed limit is as high as 85 miles an hour. One thing that's worth mentioning, though, when talking about the speed limit is, at least here in California, nobody really obeys the speed limit. As I mentioned a few moments ago, if you actually try to drive 65 on the freeway here in California, and it's not like packed bumper to bumper, you're going to have people flashing their brights at you. You're going to have people honking. They're going to pass you, flip you off, do all kinds of bad things. Here in California, the speed limit is really more of a suggestion. If you're on the freeway and you're driving 65, people are going to be flipping you off and honking at you. 65 here in California usually means 80. And then 70 usually means, just keep it below 100. And just a few other funny signs here about speed limits in California. One thing I will mention, going back to this in Texas, that same thing that I just said, that speed limits are like a suggestion, really doesn't apply in other states. I was on a 65 mile an hour stretch of road in New Mexico, and I was going 79, and I got pulled over and ticketed. So it really does depend on your state. Here in California, speed limits tend to be more like a suggestion. Other parts of the country, what that number says is probably what you should try to be going. But maybe we should actually try to obey our speed limits. And maybe we should even try to drive a little bit slower, to the chagrin of everybody around us, at least if you're in the slow lane, because if you peak at just about 55 miles an hour, your car is getting its best gas mileage.